I'm Craig Shelley. Welcome to Our Group Talks. We're excited to have you spend some time with us today. Really excited to have our guest with us, Dennis Walcott. We'll get in a little bit about that, but just want to give you the frame of we've been having these conversations over the course of the last year. Been really helpful to us. Hopefully they've been helpful to you. I see some familiar names joining us. If you're new to us, welcome. We're excited to have you with us. Dennis is the Chief Executive Officer of the Queens Public Library. He's a former Chancellor of the New York City Schools System, former Deputy Mayor, former CEO of the New York Urban League. He's a board member of Bloomberg Philanthropies. He just had his 8th grandchild earlier this week. All around great guy. The thing that I have found fascinating in sort of interacting with Dennis and learning about Dennis and learning from Dennis is just he's really been at the center of service in New York City for his whole career. Just been involved in the things that, as a native New Yorker, have impacted my life tremendously. And I'm excited to have him here with us. I think a common thread that we'll touch on a little bit is he's consistently stepped into these organizations and these situations where these big complex organizations needed to change. I know at this point, we're all looking to change. We're all looking to evolve, some by necessity, some by desire, and do that within our organization. So Dennis is a great resource, and I'm excited to share his thoughts with you all today. Couple of housekeeping things. The bathrooms are located. No, I'm just kidding. You know where the bathrooms are. You've been in your house for almost a year now. But if you want to submit questions, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little box that says Q&A. You can submit the questions right through there. We'll try and work them into the conversation as we go. You'll also have the chat feature. For those of you that have sort of ADD in Zoom, I'm seeing a couple of names on here. I know that's you. Feel free to jump on there, tell us who you are, where you're from, so everybody can see. If you have some random thoughts you want to share, though, that's great. If you have tech problems, definitely post them there. Not sure how much we'll be able to help, but if we can, we will. But again, questions on the Q&A, chat on the other box there at the bottom. And that is that. So I think just again, to just jump right in, Dennis is a leader that's, seen and done it all. The last year in particular at Queens Public Library, we've all faced these challenges this past year, but Dennis has really never wavered from the mission, never wavered from being creative and figuring out how can a library system meet the needs of its community at a time when the needs were exponential. And we'll hear some more about that as we go, because that continues right up till now. But it's been exciting, and there's going to be a lot to share. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to start with our common bond. We both grew up in Queens, but as a Queens native, Dennis, I'm just kind of curious, what does it mean to you, like all these years later, to sort of be leading the Queens library system? It's such an impactful organization in the very communities you grew up in. Would love to just hear a little bit about what the library is up to and a little bit about what that means to you.
First, good afternoon to you and to the Orr family, as well as all the people who are watching. It's a pleasure to be a part of this. And, before I give an answer to your question, I'm not big on bios at all. The shorter, the better to me. But the one thing you did not say, and I am shocked that you didn't say it, that we both are crazy runners as well. And so that part also is something relatively new for me, and that I started running 10 years ago. And I love it. I love it like crazy. And I'll weave in a little later on when you talk about change in an organization to my running and DOE as well. So growing up in Queens, I went to elementary, middle, high school in Queens. I've lived in Queens aside from college the entire life. And right now, my wife and I live probably 40 to 45 blocks from where we grew up. And it's a great experience to be the head of the Queens Public Library. See, I would ask the question to those librarians who probably, unfortunately, may not be with us anymore from 50 years ago. Could they imagine this guy who would come to the Central Library and hung out in the back of the library, supposedly reading books, being the head of their library? It is really a juxtaposition that I find truly incredible. But to me, it's an outstanding both opportunity to serve the public, to be in the borough that I love, in the city that I love, and serving the people that I care about deeply, and finding always, as a result of not me, but the great team that we have in place, new and creative ways to serve our customers and the residents of Queens and beyond.
I had not realized that you only started running 10 years ago. So that's interesting. But that's probably
There's
why
a
you.
there's a story connected to this too when you talk about change and organizational change. So yeah.
Excellent. And it's funny too. And it's weird. Like of all the times, being in the library as a kid, and I was in the Howard Beach branch, so one of your smaller branches. But the thing I most vividly remember is having to get a library card. Was the first time I had to like sign my name in cursive. I
Yep.
remember I was so excited. I spent the whole night before like trying to like
Practicing.
signing my name because this was going to be like this big deal for me. So it's amazing
My
to see the way
Mine was
libraries.
the St. Albans Library. So I grew up in the St. Albans Library, and I vividly still remember going to the library and getting the card. I'm not sure if I practiced or not. Now that's something I doubt that I did, but I mean, I do remember the fear. And then also, I'll tell you a true funny story. When the board selected me to become the head of the library, I said, "Oh crap! Do I have any outstanding fines?" And somebody will do the digging to check to see if I had any. I did not, but always the fear of, did you pay this fine or that fine? So no, libraries have been a part of my life. And then my elementary school was maybe a half a block away from where the old St. Albans Library was located. So there was always that special connection there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, so I mean, let's kind of go back a little bit to the beginning of your career. So you started as a kindergarten teacher. How do you go from there to you're leading the New York City school system? I mean, so that's so from back of the library to head of the library, teaching kindergarten to leading the whole
Sure.
school.
So I think I have to go even further back than that. In that, unfortunately, I had a tragedy in my life where I lost both of my parents 9 months apart when I was scheduled, and I actually did graduate from college. So my dad passed away first, and then I found my mom dead on the living room floor from a heart attack when I came home from college for spring break a month and a half before graduation. So I buried my mom. I went back, I graduated, and I said, okay, I have a decision to make. I went to school in Connecticut. I said, either I come back home or I stay up in Connecticut and pursue a master's. So I said, you know what, let me stay up in Connecticut and pursue a master's. And then I guess based on probably the grief and also just the focus and the intensity, I'm an only child, I knocked out my master's in a year. So like I tripled up, I quadrupled up, I went over the summer and I knocked it out in a year. And then I received my first master's in education. And I said, what am I going to do? And then a woman who was a neighbor of one of my relatives said, we're starting a new school. Why don't you apply there? And I said, fine, I would love to. So I applied, went for the interview, and it's a very unique model school. And they hired me. And I started at the Amistad Childcare School in South Jamaica, Queens, and had a great time. But I was young, and it was a good, enriching experience, and it was all Black. But unfortunately, there were a lot of fatherless boys in that particular school, and I was a Black male kindergarten teacher, and so a lot of them would gravitate to me. So I was single at that point, and I said, you know what? Let me quit my job and I'm going to start an alternative Big Brother program. So I started an alternative Big Brother program called the Frederick Douglass Brother to Brother program, and where the traditional Big Brother program was for boys between the ages of 8 through 16, I modeled my program with boys between the ages of 5 through 12. And then matched myself up to two little brothers and gradually grew the program. And this is a lesson learned as well when you talk about challenges, in that I received too much publicity too soon. And so I was able to really get a lot of publicity for the program. I got a full page story in the Daily News. And then I convinced this gentleman, Earl Tolliver is his name, who was the public affairs director at the old Channel 5 back then, to run a public service spot. And back then, and I would be dating myself right now with this next statement, I asked him if he could run it before Soul Train, which was appearing on Channel 5. And while it was a brilliant marketing suggestion, it just overwhelmed the organization. I mean, because the number of inquiries of people who wanted to be big brothers and little brothers coming in was tremendous. And I didn't have the infrastructure to handle that. And I always wanted to be very conscious of trying to be professional. and not leaving anyone in the lurch, but also making sure we did our due diligence and screening out the people who want to be both big brothers and the parents who wanted their children as part of the little brothers. And so I maintained a shoestring operation, but then I met the woman who would become my wife. And it's one thing to be single and unemployed. It's another thing if you're thinking about getting married and being unemployed. So then I approached a person who was an executive director of a not-for-profit agency who admired what I did in quitting the job and starting this alternative Big Brother program. And she had suggested that I apply for a job there. And I said, okay, and I have a master's in education. She said, unfortunately, we only hire people who have a master's in social work, but we have a work study program. So first you have to get accepted to Fordham University in the School of Social Work, and then we'll talk. So I got accepted to Fordham, started working at an agency called Spence Chapin Services to Families and Children, where I was a foster care and adoption worker. And then my third year of the work study program was at an agency which is technically no longer in existence, but it's just morphed into something else. Back then it was called the Greater New York Fund United Way. And the Greater New York Fund United Way was the allocation arm of the United Way of New York City, and then they merged together. So then they hired me, and I worked there for 5 years. And the executive director, who I learned a tremendous amount from back then, had a big belief. I hire students, but really I don't expect them to stay that long. And so he encouraged you to look to maybe after your fourth year or fifth year. And then I applied for a job, got accepted as the executive director of an agency called Harlem Dowling Children's Service, which is a child welfare agency. And back then it was the 80s, it was 1985. And I did that for 5 years. And then I went to the Urban League and I did that for 12 years. And then I met a guy who I didn't know, quite frankly, I didn't know his name. And you'd be slapping me on my wrist for being a not-for-profit person and not knowing the name of Mike Bloomberg back then. I had no clue who he was. And someone introduced us and we clicked. And then he eventually, once he won, asked me to become his deputy mayor. And I think the real bonding took place one day. He was like 30 points down. This is obviously just before 9/11. And he was getting his butt beat in the general election in a matchup with either candidate that won. But we walked down Fifth Avenue together, just talking stuff. I had planned to go skydiving the next day for my 50th birthday. He had crashed the helicopter. And we were doing that type of conversation. And then the relationship developed from there. So then I became deputy mayor and did that for 8.5 years, and then became chancellor and did that for 3.5 years. So, I mean, that's the step by step, but every job that I've had has involved public service one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a story. And having been around you, I am not at all surprised that you hatched the idea to go on before Soul Train and then overwhelmed yourself with interest. You were never at lack of creative ideas. So, sort of thinking about the Bloomberg administration a little bit, and I think there's an interesting parallel to what you do now at Queens Public Library, right? Like, so at that time, that was really an acceleration of sort of public and private partnerships and sort of bringing philanthropy into sort of what the city was doing, the Fund for Public School, the mayor's own personal philanthropy, all of that, using sort of non-government things to help advance government priorities. And that's kind of what Queens Public Library in some ways is too. Like, it's an amalgamation of sort of nonprofit and a public institution. But so what role did nonprofits play when you were when you're in the school system? Like, what role does nonprofits play in advancing the work in the New York City schools? A lot of just even looking at the list here, I know a lot of the people on here work in nonprofits that work directly with the schools. What role did it play when you were at the Department of Ed?
Some of those individuals that you're talking about either worked at DOE who are now running organizations like Pencil and other organizations. I saw Greg say hi. And I mean, it played a very important role in that from a contractual point of view. There were a number of relationships that were developed with not-for-profits prior to me that really resulted in strong delivery of services to the communities throughout New York City and targeted to the children of New York City. Even when I was at the New York Urban League, we had a formal relationship with the old Board of Education and a number of contracts that we received from DOE and the provision of services. So not-for-profits for me are always key in both the creativity, being on the ground, because you can't do it all on your own. And if you think you can do it all on your own, then you're fooling yourself. You're not being a solid manager at all. And so the network of not-for-profits that are out there that are providing the services are extremely important. And it is fascinating because I think there was even hopefully a healthier respect having been in the not-for-profit world. I mean, my first job within government was as deputy mayor. I did other things that were volunteer activities or served on boards like the old Board of Ed and other type of entities as a result of appointments by mayors in general. But working in government and bringing that not-for-profit portfolio hopefully gave me sensitivity and respect on how we try to be knowledgeable of the role they play and the increased value they have to the system.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk right now around sort of like where New York City is and sort of it's at this moment, and is it going to quote unquote come back, and how is it going to be different? I mean, I know just in my life, I feel like I've been through this 3 or 4 times having grown up in New York. Like there's these big moments where everything was going to change. But I'm curious now, sort of as we can see maybe the end of where we are with the pandemic, how do you think New York City rebounds from the challenges, and what role do you think nonprofits play in that rebound?
So I think to take the second part first, I think not-for-profits play a key role in that. I mean, not-for-profits, unfortunately, have, like a lot of individuals and groups and businesses, have suffered tremendously over the last year or so. And I think the rebound of the city is based on the neighborhoods of the city and strengthening the neighborhoods of the city. And not-for-profits play a very important role as far as the neighborhood connection, the direct knowledge of individuals, the ability to be there day, night, weekends, and having that connective tissue to the lifeblood of the community. So I think not-for-profits play an important role. I think that what's happening now, there was an interesting story in the Times yesterday about Stephen Ross and having someone from the business community or someone sensitive to the needs of the business community being the person who becomes the mayor. And there was the group who was talking about people more to the left and being around certain type of reforms and what it means from more of a left point of view. I think a balanced discussion is needed as far as what the future holds. And that balanced discussion has to include the role of businesses, because businesses drive the revenue. I mean, real estate drives the revenue. Wall Street drives the revenue. And that revenue fuels the engines of the not-for-profits. And then obviously private philanthropy, which we've talked about as well, extremely important, because you have to have that type of community here, both for the tax base, but also for the philanthropic efforts that they probably and importantly play in the not-for-profit community. And so we have to have that type of balanced discussion, both at the executive level as well as the legislative level, and not get sidetracked one side or the other, but where people meet in the middle to understand, I think, the interconnectedness between all the parties. And when that happens, then I think the city will start to rebound and thrive. And we as not-for-profits, we as the library, I mean, we had a PEG this year of $1.9 million. And so we were able to find some savings through accruals and other means of meeting that 1.9 without really laying off any individuals. Next year, our PEG is significantly higher. And that's not going to happen. Matter of fact, yesterday I had testimony before Jimmy Van Bramer's committee around libraries and cultural institutions. And we talked about the devastating impact that the next year's PEG would have on service delivery, on the ability to order books and what it means, the number of books, and especially as we reopen gradually and being safe for our customers and our staff. And we've been very lucky. A lot of our not-for-profit sisters and brothers out there have not been as lucky. And so the challenges of the not-for-profits will be tremendous over the next year without that balanced approach and people understanding of where the money comes from and having that ability to then understand how the tax dollars flow. And we shouldn't get wrapped up in the money that was allocated by the feds and once passed by, I guess, the House is tomorrow. And then that's good, but that will not stretch us into the future. And we have to look internally within New York City and New York State on how we address that.
Yeah, definitely. Let's stay with the library for a minute. I mean, over this past year, what role has the library system played in the community and everything that's been going on? And I know there's some exciting things happening right now this week as well. So just talk a little bit about what the library's been up to and the role you've seen it play and driven it to play.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. I mean, we are blessed to have a great team at the Queens Public Library. I mean, they're so creative. I was listening, had a meeting this morning, and I was listening to all the things that they're doing. And we have basically maintained the same level of service from a programmatic point of view without, unfortunately, the customers coming in and being able to sit down and mingle with each other and getting in-person type of service, aside from the grab and go and ordering books and getting printouts. So we have sessions from everywhere from hip hop to children's story hour with me on the other side of this discussion, interviewing people like the Attorney General, Letitia James, the head of SUNY Downstate, a woman named Dr. Lisa Cooper, who deals with health equity issues in the country. This past month, we had a 24-hour Black Health and Healing Summit, which was great. And so how crazy I am. I was up at 3:00 in the morning to listen to the person talk about insomnia. And so, I mean, it stretched throughout the day and the evening at night. We had Dougie Fresh talking about some of his health issues, and we had a lot of views by individuals. So what we've been able to do is really expand our programs, including something that, I mean, all of it is frustrating not having our customers in our doors, but especially with our after school students and not having them have a place to go. But we have a program that's called Stacks, and Stacks is our after school program. And I was listening to the presentation of the head of Stacks this morning. And it's like amazing what they're doing virtually and reaching a student population and providing services that will keep them glued to their laptop, computer, iPad, or their phone. So we have been able to increase our services virtually, but more importantly, I think increase our reach. The bad part is that we haven't had people be able to come in the door. I mean, they can order the books, they come in and pick up their books, and then they leave. And we've expanded that to roughly 36 of our libraries with some more to go. And I think what you were alluding to earlier was that yesterday there was an announcement where we're going to turn our Flushing library, which is our biggest trafficked library, over to the city for it to serve as a vaccine site. And so we're looking forward to that. And then we're talking to the city about several other libraries as well, serving as vaccine sites. And then back in June or July, we started the process of converting some of our libraries into testing sites as well. So we have had not administered by us, by health and hospitals, but we have had 60,000 people come through our door for testing. And as I said to, I think, the group this morning, that I could only imagine if the local library was not in that neighborhood and available for testing, what, if anything, people would do. So my vision, our vision collectively, is to serve as that point of contact. I always like to say the community's living room for individuals to come through our door when possible to get services, and if not, to come through our virtual door to get services.
It's amazing. I mean, it's sort of like this expansive view of the library system that I'll admit I didn't get till I started sort of hanging around you all, but of like, it's like you have many community centers out there in the community, and you're right, it is like a living room. I mean, I remember standing one day at the Central branch back when the branches were open for in-person thing at the opening with you, and you greet everybody as the doors open. And when I tell you the doors open and a flood of people come in, like, people don't believe me when I say this. I mean, you saw it every day, but like, there'd be a line out the door waiting to go when the library opened. People would flood in. And that's when you realize, like, oh, wait a minute, that's what this library is. Like, this isn't a place where like 12-year-old Craig was getting his books. This is a place that literally is a hub.
At least you were getting your books, not like 15 or 16-year-old Dennis who was just hanging out. But no, I want to pick up on that point because I miss that. I mean, I know a lot of our customers. Our team obviously knows a tremendous number of our customers, and there's several of our customers that stand out to me. Like there's one gentleman who comes in at 9 o'clock in the morning every day, and then he goes back to the same table and the same seat, and will sit there until 2:30. And as you said, I think you said, my desk is on the floor, so I see what's going on and the biorhythms and the flow at the library. And one day, he doesn't read, he doesn't get a book. I never really see him go to the bathroom. He just sits there. So I went up to him one day as he was leaving. I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? He said, no. I said, I see you come in at 9 and I see you leave at 2:30. And it's every day. And I don't really see you with a book or anything. I said, can I ask just what are you doing? And he said, the library is my oasis from the craziness. And I said, whoa, maybe like take a step back. And just coming in and having the feeling of safety, knowing no one will really mess with him. He's protected. He's probably mentally going through his day, his weekend. I don't know what he did after 2:30. And that's one type of customer the library serves. There's another gentleman who is probably now 77, because 2 years ago he was 75, give or take. And I would see him in there all the time and reading. And so we developed this nice chemistry, him and my team. We would always talk to him and talk to all the customers. And so come to find out he's homeless and he was living in a shelter. And so we talked about that. So I said, I always see you reading. How many books a week do you read? He said, 10. He said, no. And I said, well, do you take them back where you are staying to read? He said, no, that's when I found out. He said, no, I live in a shelter and I can't get a library card. I said, you can get a library card. I said, we'll help you complete the information and get you a library card. So then his 10 books a week went up to probably 15 books a week or so. But again, and so then there was a period of time we didn't see him at all. And I was concerned he may have passed away. And so then I sent out I asked folks to see if they knew where he was. And so we reached out to the various libraries. So then one of our managers got back to us, said, yeah, the guy you were describing, it looks like he's here at my branch. And I said, oh, so then I hopped in the car and I tracked him down. It was him. And he was saying that they shifted his shelter to another location, which was inconvenient for him to come to Central, but this is closer to this particular branch. And I said, okay, fine. So we had a nice conversation, caught up with each other. And that's what the library brings to people. There are people who know that, do you know this? I don't even know if you know this. Tuesday is New Book Day. So when you look in the Times and others, you'll see the new books come out for the most part on Tuesday. And it's also New Book Day at the library. So when the books are released, the bestsellers, people normally have more reservations. We put some on the shelves and all that. And so there's this couple who are there every Tuesday around 10 o'clock because they know Pat, one of our librarians, is out there putting the books on the shelves, and they're out there with their basket. They're so cute, with their basket, and they're going around picking up the books. Before a Jewish holiday, the Orthodox community and those who are not Orthodox will come in and pick up books for that weekend or that holiday because they know it's going to be a long period of time. And so, I mean, there's the chemistry and the biorhythms of all of our libraries that represent the neighborhoods and beyond.
It's really special. I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche, but like, oh, there's a million stories there, and they're not just on the shelves, right? Like it's really the hub of a community. So like that's sort of the exciting part. And not that fundraising is not exciting. I'm a fundraiser. I find it to be enormously exciting. But fundraising is part of the job as a CEO of any nonprofit organization, as it is at the library. So what role does philanthropy play at the library? And then, how is your role as a fundraiser, how do you activate as a fundraiser at the library, and how is that different than maybe when you're at the New York Urban League?
So I think the difference from my time at the Urban League, is that I know a little more. I analyze my own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to fundraising and try to correct those weaknesses with a stopover at DOE. And that's a major stopover. I mean, as deputy mayor, I didn't have to worry about fundraising. At DOE, we had an arm, a fund for public schools, that was responsible for fundraising. And I think DOE reminded me of the importance of quality team, having quality people in place. And I always remember there was a case, you'll enjoy this story, that the executive director of the Fund for Public Schools at the time had been working on this couple to get them to try to donate to DOE around a specific program. And this couple had never really donated, to my understanding, education at all. And so she, our exec, thought they were ready. So she put me in the next step to sit down with them, and we were able to seal the deal. And I just remember the sense of satisfaction of knowing that here's a couple that is investing $1 million in DOE for this particular program. And is as a result of the hard work of the team in place, and then whatever little thing I could do at the end to hopefully put the bow on the package. And I think that was truly satisfying. And it was just good to have people who in place who know what they're doing. I'm not a fundraiser. I mean, I am a fundraiser, but I'm not a fundraiser. I mean, every day I do, I am selling Queens Public Library. So I'm very clear of my role in every program, every initiative, every word out of my mouth represents Queens Public Library. Even from, it's interesting, I mean, as I say that, it reminds me, even when I had the Urban League or other organizations, I really wouldn't sign up as a volunteer for too many other organizations, because you have to establish your identity and who you're representing. And you can't represent too many different types of entities, otherwise it confuses the funder. Is he here for this or she here for that? And you have to be very clear who you are representing in fundraising. So I'm very clear that I'm a Queens Public Library guy, and I'm there to sell the mission, and whether it be direct fundraising, because the other thing that people think, because they don't realize that the Queens Public Library is a 501c3. So they think, some people think it's a government agency, just like in other cities, libraries are a base of the city. It's a part of the city. Whereas they're 501c3, Brooklyn Public Library and New York Public Library are all 501c3 organizations. So with that, I have to make sure people, one, understand the identity and what we're doing. And even like yesterday with the announcement around Flushing Library, I'm conscious of the implications for that, both from a private philanthropic point of view, but also a government point of view. The money we raise is not necessarily just given to us by the city. Yes, there is a formula, but if the city wants to move on and say, we're not going to fund you at this level. So my goal is to make sure we constantly reinforce message around the value of, for me, the Queens Public Library, what we represent to the community, and the benefits to the city overall. And then if that translates also to donors, then that's even better, because in addition to the dollars we get from the city, it's obviously enhanced by the private philanthropy that takes place, whether small donors or large donors.
So I'd be curious, I mean, rough estimate, how much time as a CEO do you spend on fundraising, do you think?
Yeah, I hear you. It's tough to separate out, because this is going to sound weird. You spend all your time fundraising. I mean, the actual act of it, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. But to me, every moment is around fundraising. Even in talking to you, I want to make sure that I present properly, that I convey what we're doing. Even though they're not-for-profits and others here, they may say, yeah, they're doing some good stuff. And we're raising money too, but I'll give a check for $25. I mean, that's not the goal of today. but it's always part of who I am. When I'm out in the streets doing my stuff, I fundraising because I'm trying to be a proper professional and talk about who we are as an organization. Even when I'm running and it's 5 o'clock in the morning and people recognize me in the neighborhood, they know that I'm the person connected, well, not all, but I mean, connected to the Queens Public Library. And matter of fact, when the pandemic first started, there was a woman who would walk her dog around 5:30. She said, and this is when we were really ramping up the virtual programs, and she would give me feedback. She said, as I'm running by, she said, "Yeah, I saw XYZ program." And I mean, and that is part of marketing, and marketing is part of fundraising and how you do that. The other thing is interesting, and I thought about this beforehand as well, that I learned from Mike Bloomberg, because I've watched him in action, not when I was on the board, but just in general. He said, if they don't sell me in the first half an hour, then I'm not going to be sold. And so it's having your stuff together and laying it out with your mission without any BS at all. I mean, you be respectful, but who you are or what you're asking for, that message is out there right away, and you have to deliver it. And so I guess to answer your question, it's like it's always part of who I am. And then I always try to maintain who I am as the real person who I am. You won't see something that it's not me. And so I think that helps as well.
As a fundraiser, that's the perfect answer I want to hear from a CEO. Like, I'm always fundraising. Perfect. Switch a little bit. So you're also on the board of Bloomberg Philanthropies. So that's sort of a unique, you're kind of in the well, as a CEO of the Urban League or the New York Urban League, maybe you didn't know who Mike Bloomberg is. Now everybody knows who Bloomberg Philanthropies is. So first, how does that happen? How did you end up on that board? What is your role, there? And what have you learned, like doing that, sort of helping to give away money as opposed to sort of be on this side of the equation?
So how it happened is that Mike Bloomberg and Patty Harris asked me to join the board. And that happened after I finished my tenure as chancellor. So when I finished my tenure as chancellor, December 31st, 2013, my wife and I took a little time off together. And then when I came back, there was an interim assignment where I was a special monitor for the State Department of Education up in East Ramapo, addressing some of the issues of the racial and ethnic tension up there around education. And so just prior to that, the mayor and Patty asked me to join the board, and I was honored to be asked, and I joined it. It's been a good while since I've been on the board. And the beauty of being on the board is not just to giving away the money. I mean, it's Mike Bloomberg's money. I mean, and Patty is the CEO of the philanthropy, and we're all board members, but Mike is going to do his thing. And so it's to see the talent that he has working there as part of his team, or Patty has working there as part of her team. It is just off the chart. And it's not local, so it's really, I mean, they've done some local things, but for the most part, it's really international. And so just watch. I don't think they get the credit for all the creative work, whether it's the environment, whether it's health, whether it's education. And people sometimes get locked in on ideology one way or the other, however they feel, versus the philanthropic success that they've had in having baseline of measurement as far as outcomes are concerned. The work they're doing with cities around innovation is just off the chart. The work they're doing in health, clean water in Africa, teaching farmers how to grow products to be self-sufficient in different countries, dealing with drowning deaths in different regions as well, and the number of people who would drown, dealing with information, capturing information, because people in certain countries didn't even know how many people were dying as a result of not having the infrastructure there to capture that. I mean, that's all part of things that Bloomberg Philanthropy is funding. Clean air, getting rid of coal, you name it. So just being a part of that and listening to smart people discuss smart things and come up with solutions for results. Was it 2 weeks ago? City Lab, which is creation in conjunction with Bloomberg Philanthropies, did a lot of had a session dealing with a lot of the work that they're doing, creative government and government beyond the United States. So that experience has just been tremendous, and just watching and gets me thinking, and the ability of knowing how to try to be creative. And again, Mike has been really good, and he was a great boss. In that, if you fail, just know why you failed. I mean, and then correct it. There was a time, I won't say what it was. There was a time when I was at DOE. No, I was still deputy mayor, and something just went really wrong. I said, if I don't fix this, you'll have my resignation on your desk in the morning. He looked over at me and said, no, because if I'm going to have to suffer because of this, you're going to have to suffer as well and stay here and suffer with me. And it worked out in the long run. But having that type of transactional boss, as far as understanding the dynamics of reality and that you're going to fail sometimes, is good. And then that carries over to philanthropy, and that, as you know, and the audience knows, just because you get a grant to do something doesn't necessarily mean that that grant's going to work out. And having a funder who understands that, I think, is extremely important.
Yeah, I think that there's a whole concept of like people recognizing that philanthropy is a little bit of like a risk capital that sometimes we forget. Right? Like we aren't always going to succeed. And the question often is, what did we learn by trying it this way? And what will we do the next time? So sort of along that vein, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the roles you've held. And so you've walked into these situations where really ginormous, for lack of a better word, change was needed. So, you come to Queens Library, it's really at a crossroad. There was need to reestablish trust, with the community and with donors. You became the school's chancellor. The prior chancellor had a really short tenure. And there was a real need to sort of establish all right, now we're here for a longer term leadership again. And then, probably writ large, like you walk in with the Bloomberg administration right after 9/11. And every one of these instances, right, this is like change management on steroids. How do you approach that? Like, how do you walk into a place where you're going to need to evolve the culture, and it's a big place? How have you approached these various challenges?
So I'll start with a quick college story, in that as much as you hear me talking right now and all that, I'm pretty shy kind of guy at times. And when I was a freshman, sophomore, I said, I'm going to volunteer to be an MC at some social gathering. And I was so uncomfortable, but it was challenging myself to get out of my comfort zone. And I don't know where I got that from, my mother, my father, my grandparents, I don't know. But it was always, I'm always looking for something to get me out of that comfort zone, to challenge, to try to fix it, to manage it. So that's one part of the question. But the other part is always relying on folks who are great and smarter than I am. And I say that with all sincerity, who know it. I mean, at DOE, the crew there, while maybe they were demoralized based on all that transpired just before I got there, and some left, there was still a core dedicated group of individuals who were educators, who were smarter than I am, who knew their business. And I was there to try to work with them to take us to a different level and take the heat. So that's important. At Queens Public Library, same thing. It's a combination of having people who are, I'm not a librarian, who are definitely smarter than me when it comes to library services, or know how to fundraise or do whatever they're doing. You trust them, you develop a bond and connection with them, and let them go out and do their business. That's what Mike Bloomberg instilled in me as well. In that, okay, I'm going to hold you accountable, and I'm going to press you like crazy with questions, and you better be able to answer. But I trust you to go out there and do the job. And if you mess up, own up to it, and then how do you fix it to move forward? And that's the same thing with the Flushing vaccine site. You're taking your biggest library, even though it's still grab and go, Flushing is always on steroids. I mean, it's just when we were open to the public, Flushing would average 5,000 people a day, 5,000 to 6,000 people a day, coming in, out, in and out. And to take that offline for the good of the city was a difficult decision, but it was, I think, and still believe, the right decision, And when somebody said, well, aren't you going to get heat? I said, I get heat. I get heat. I mean, it's just, you got to do the right thing. And having the team in place, which we have at Queens Public Library, who are not scared and not intimidated, hopefully feel empowered, tell the truth as far as challenging me. I'll throw out some crazy ideas at time, and they'll give me the look and like, I don't know, or it just dies on the vine, and I know and they know it's dying on the vine and it's not going to happen. That's what I need. And so it's not about me per se, it's empowering others and making sure the institution is stronger, ideally, when you leave, so that way it takes off on its own.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. That whole concept of like taking the heat, I think that's one in particular that I'm trusting their people. Actually, most of the things you said are things that many nonprofit leaders don't do, right? Like they're in they're sort of in this treadmill of like trying to just keep things afloat, and they're just not equipped to sort of step forward and say, I'll take the heat, or step forward and say, I will trust you. But I think it's more necessary in what we do than probably anything else that I've been involved in, at least. So
as long as you're not, I mean, if you're doing things legally and have your board involved and they're aware what's going on. I'll give you a real time story, again, involving Flushing. Had a board meeting this past Thursday. So, yep, this past Thursday. And I've been talking to my board chairs about the conversations with the city around the vaccination sites and all. And the board was up to speed. For the most part, we were talking to staff, but we we're trying to balance and not getting it out before the mayor got out in front of the mayor. And so it's a like tightrope we were walking. And then the city, as it does, not just this administration, but just as part of the bureaucracy of the city, they went out with their press release, even though we had been talking without us knowing it right away. So all of a sudden we see the press release out. I said, oh crap. And the press release is out. But we had done our due diligence in letting the board know, people at Flushing know, we were doing some of the internal work. And if we hadn't, then it would have been like deep crap. So even if I got heat, then I'm prepared to take the heat. And if we didn't touch with someone or someone else because of we just didn't get to you in time, we weren't prepared for the press release to come out at that moment, we'll make up and say, hey, this is what happened, and being straight up and honest with folks as far as I don't have any reason to misrepresent or lie, because what does it mean to me? I'm getting older in life. I mean, as when you measure, what can they do to you? As long as you're trying to do the right thing. So that's the attitude I have.
And that's a great attitude. But you mentioned the board, so I'm going to get to one of the questions that was in the Q&A. I'll try and get through.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about how you triangulate as a fundraiser, between you as the CEO, the fundraising staff, and the board. In your case, kind of two boards, because there's the library board and then there's the foundation board.
Foundation board.
How do you sort of work that relationship, your fundraising staff, you and the foundation board, the fundraising board?
So constant communication, I think, is important, and having the team in place. I mean, through the foundation side and on the library side. But again, I can't stress it enough, and a tremendous amount of quality people there who are dedicated to the library and dedicated to their jobs. And with that, there's always conversations taking place. But what we try to do from a macro level is to let people know what's going on from the boards, both boards. And then some of the library board members also serve on the foundation board, but we have other foundation board members who are not part of the board of trustees, because we have a very unique board structure where it's appointed by both the mayor and the borough president. So the foundation then plays that quasi-independent role. But it's this constant communication, constantly let folks know what's going on, hopefully trying to get back to people right away when they have a question on both sides of the ledger, and breaking down the walls. I mean, there's no reason to have silos per se, as far as information flow, both coming into you, but also going out. And so we're hopefully doing that as well as possible.
Yeah, and we do a ton of work on this idea of how do you work with your boards and helping and all that. And I think you've just boiled down like 10 years worth of slide decks with this. It's communication, right? Like somehow that is what it almost entirely is it just, if everybody communicated, it just gets so much better. Another question from the Q&A here. Actually, I'll answer one that was in the chat. Even though they broke the rules and asked the question in the chat, they started by saying that I'm a really good facilitator, so I will answer their question anyway. The recording of this will be available on our website, if not by tonight, certainly by tomorrow. You'll be able to find it on our website. That was that question. But back to the relevant questions on topic here. So you said everything you do, is related to fundraising. How do you empower everyone in the organization to sort of have that mindset? Or can you, like in an organization like yours that is so vast, like, literally everyone is dealing with potential donors out there in branches, but I mean, how do you sort of instill and empower that ability or recognition that we're all doing fundraising with everybody?
A tougher question, because people, whether it's at Queens Public Library or DOE, I mean, they're into their particular job itself. And it's important for people to understand, I think, the value of what money represents to allow them to do their job or to be creative. One of the things we tried to do 4 years ago now, is we created what we called innovation grants within the library structure with money that we raised, so that way people out in the branches could apply for innovation grants. And what the goal was try to empower them of thinking creatively as far as how to use money differently. And so $10,000 may not seem a lot, but $10,000 in a branch can be very helpful in doing creative type of things where you're not locked into a specific defined program. So it's getting those types of initiatives down to folks outside of Central and outside of the foundation side. I think what the foundation has done and continues to do, and will do even more so, is work with the programmatic staff around fundraising, because people understand. We had what's called a library services meeting this morning, which is led by our chief librarian. And so people are giving reports on their various portfolios, so teen services, adult services, senior services. And one way or another, each of them is responsible for working with the foundation or library managers in the raising of money to sustain or grow their programs. So it's trying to reinforce that value so people have that clear understanding that it's not necessarily always going to be there, and how you instill that. I think that's important for people to understand. But there's always going to be clashes. I'm not going to paint a romantic picture either. I mean, you got programmatic people saying, well, you shouldn't be telling me to do this, or foundation people saying, well, you should be doing it. I mean, that's inherent. When I was at DOE, Urban League, you name it, that's part of the structure. Is how do you manage the structure to get people to understand that you each play an important part in carrying out that goal.
Yeah, there's a big piece of that too, of like just recognizing like it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be like what you read in the textbook, like, and it never is. And sort of once you accept there's like a level of dissonance that will always exist, you kind of, you're just better off for it. We're rounding towards the end here, so I just want to maybe just say like, what's one piece of advice you give to nonprofit leaders, particularly if they're trying to focus on change in their organizations? What's the one piece of advice you give to our listeners?
So I can't do one. So one is always keep your board abreast of what's going on. I mean, and have your board as part of that change, because if you go out there without your board being there with you, then you're potentially going to fail and lose your job. And you got to be very careful about that. And I think not accepting business as usual. I mean, finding different ways to push your agency to approach it differently, especially in the time that we're in right now. I mean, what, a year and a month ago, would we ever thought of a library being used as a testing center? I mean, we wouldn't even know what the heck it was, or a vaccine site. And, finding that balance to make sure it happens, so that way you continue to evolve, you serve the needs of the public, but also the public will view you in a way that it's not the same old way of doing business.
All right, I cannot give better advice than that. So that is unfortunate, since you should all still hire our group anyway. But that is the best advice. Don't be happy with the status quo. Thank you very, very much for joining us, Dennis. Thanks for the opportunity to be involved.
Thanks.
And thanks everyone for joining us. You'll get an email with a survey. We'd love your feedback. You'll get a link to the recording, and You'll get information on our future events, and we hope you'll join us. But Dennis, again, thank you very, very much. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
My best to the audience as well. And have a great one. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.